That's me again. I'm George. I'm here as your humble assistant and servant. And of course, we welcome all of you who have tuned in today. I finally put together that video of the trip to Scotland, and I went to several different distilleries. Now, I felt obligated to do this real quick intro to try to describe what's about to take place. So just keep your eyes open. Don't let this bother you yet. We'll use that later on. We went to Deanston Distillery, and that was right outside of Stirling, so you'll see that introduction, and I kind of focused on that one primarily. And then there's also another one in here called Clydeside, and we'll describe a little bit more about that. But the underlying message of all of those trips and all of those visits and tours and discussions that I was able to have just validated that not only are you on the right track, you're an expert at what you do. So check this out. All right, we're here at Deanston Distillery. Now this is 8 miles out of Stirling, and we left Glasgow early this morning. So glad to be out here. This place is simply amazing. For 180 years it was a cotton mill, and in 1966 they converted it to a distillery. So there's so much to see in here, and maybe we could pick up some tidbits, some ideas, or we can validate some principles that we've been using almost forever. So follow me through and we'll show you. I've got some still photos through the whole process I can show you, and then we'll do a follow-up at the very end. So come on in, join me, let's take our walk through. Nestled right there on the side of the river where they draw their water from, and that's because it flows as fast. It's like the second fastest flowing river that they have in the area or in that region. Most of the distilleries in the mid-Scotland area pull their water from Lake Catherine, or Loch Catherine. So, but this is one of the few that pull their water directly from a source that they're located next to. Now, just so you'll understand too, there's a difference between highlands and lowlands, and it has nothing to do with elevation. There's a natural, I learned this while I was there, there's a natural fault that goes across the country. So you've got the highlands and you got the lowlands. How about that? Let's move on and see what else that Deanston has to offer.
Right, let's go. Right, I've shown you that. So they're £1,000 each. Now these crawler casks here are ex-sherry butt casks. Does anybody drink sherry? To sell. That's why they cost so much. It's hardly anybody drinks sherry these days. They're very hard to get hold of. Because £2,000 maybe higher. It depends what kind of sherry come in.
Now you'll notice all these barrels. Amazing, they've got these barrels stacked everywhere. Now, we all know that here in the United States, especially in the state of Kentucky and where they make bourbon, one of the requirements, and this was in order to keep the cooperage profession alive, one of the rules or the laws about being able to call it bourbon is to ensure that the barrel is used only one time. Well, guess what? Yep, that makes all these barrels available for resale throughout the world. And Deanston actually purchases their barrels, the used barrels, from Kentucky. You know, just a quick snapshot of this grinder really doesn't do it any justice. It's been there since 1946. And the company who built this and installed it has such a good reputation, they actually went out of business. Interestingly enough, yeah, this thing's only broken down twice, and in both cases it was due to human error, and it's still working today.
So, from the mill, we grind down the barley into 11 tons of grist. It'll come through that back hopper pipe there, into this vessel, and this is called an open top mash tun. Now there's only 6 of them in Scotland that do not have a lid, and this is the largest one, and it's because the original mash tun that we had when it was installed in
Now you've seen it all, almost. That is one huge mash tun. That mash, now, you know, once they, look, they do this, they're doing exactly the same thing that we're doing, or we're doing exactly the same thing they're doing. It's grain, water, and yeast. They're using malted grain. Now, this mash tun holds 57,000 liters. That's like 15,100 gallons. Size of an average indoor or in-ground swimming pool. So, depending on the size of your pool, of course. So don't quote me on that. And inside this, you are going to be amazed at the process and what they have that goes on in there with the stirrers at the same time that they're going through the process that we go through in our home distilling in order to prepare those grains to extract as much sugars as we possibly can by converting the starch to fermentable sugars by the use of what? You got it. Yeah, amylase enzyme that's already resident in the grain. They don't even have to add anything additional. Now they do this the same way. They start off at about 123 degrees just soaking, the protein rest. Then they pump up the temperature about 145. That gets it all mixed up and mashed good. And then guess where they go? Yep, you got it. 155. 155 degrees is like 70 degrees Celsius. And at that point is when they allow it to set and convert the starches to fermentable sugars. Sound familiar? You better believe it. And then, of course, after that, they actually, for the sparging, which, of course, we use the same term, sparging, or rinsing the grains, they use 93 degrees Celsius water, which it really equates to about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's just to rinse all of those sugars, the residual sugars left in the grain, out of the grain, because they do not ferment on the grain. You ready? Let's move on to the next step. Okay, this is all of this mash that's already been converted is transferred over to the fermentation tank. And oh, by the way, take a wild guess, and I'll give you a couple of seconds. Take a wild guess of what their target ABV, alcohol by volume, in 57,000 liters. Nice try. 8%. 8% is their goal. That's their target for their alcohol by volume. And how do they get there? They use Distiller's Active Dry Yeast. Wow, what a surprise. So after fermentation, it's simple after that. Then it goes right into the still.
So what's the reason you like to take photographs inside? Just because usually there's highly flammable gases in there. Oh. Yeah, there are a lot of gases, but I know we're not...
Did you notice something odd or something unique about all four of those stills there? Take another look. Take another look. Each still is designed, or each pair of stills are designed for a specific purpose. And how can you tell the difference? Well, it's the shape of the column. Look, here's what you have. In this particular case, at Deanston Distillery, they've got this huge copper, I need another marker, bam. They've got this huge still. All right, and then on top of that still, they've got this column that comes up, and they've got this, some people call it an onion head. And you'll notice the shape of that, and then it's a really, really tall stack. These columns are 24 inches in diameter. So, I mean, they're really large because they carry a large flow of vapors. Now you'll notice on the first two, you'll notice that the shape of this is a little bit different because this is where they do the stripping run. And then they've got one right next to it, they do the second stripping run. And then on the other two stills, the ones that are actually closer to the camera that we use, because remember in Deanston Distillery, there's a lot of restrictions about filming, so we were kind of restricted in certain areas, and this is one where we were only able to shoot through the door. You got this still, and you've got this other one, and you'll notice that the shape of what we would call the onion is a lot more pronounced. It's a lot larger. And the purpose of that is, and this is for the polishing run or the final run. And what this causes is it causes a cyclonic effect inside here, which they claim offers them the ability to get just a minor amount of reflux action, which really helps them increase the amount of alcohol and the purity of the alcohol and still retain the flavor. So what are their goals after 8% alcohol by volume? Well, in most cases, from this still, from the final polishing run, they'll produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 146 proof. And in this particular case, that is a success. Then it's on to, you guessed it, barrels, because 60 to 70% of the character, flavor, mouthfeel, and color will come from the barrels in which they store it. Now, of course, in order to call this a Scotch whiskey, besides having to be made in Scotland, it needs to be aged for 3 years and 1 day. So, brings up our next point. We're going to visit Clydeside, and I'm going to show you something that's a little bit unique because each distillery has its own uniqueness. Of course, the processes are all the same, but there's some unique twists in each one that kind of separates them all from the pack. I hope you get that. We'll be right with you. Now we have the Clydeside Distillery. Located on the River Clyde, there in the middle of Glasgow. You'll also notice the two large stills. You can just see through the window panes there. This distillery there's your center testing station in between the two stills that are mounted behind those windows. And this is where your distiller will determine the proof and test the spirit run and, of course, the stripping runs. Located on the left-hand side. Now, if you look at the shape of this still in particular, there's a beautiful view of the River Clyde. Can you guess what this one is designed for? You got it. That's the spirit run column, or the one for polishing. You notice the onion shape. There's the arm, and of course your condenser. Yep. All the way back, everything goes right into that center testing station. Now on the right-hand side, these three jars are low wines or feints. It's 32%, 4 shots at 76.5%. And that's what we would consider heads. And then our spirit run was 71% alcohol by volume. Now I know it was quick, but did you see the shape of that? Now there they are side by side. Knowing what you know now, tell me which one does what for your spirit. Now I don't want to go through a whole lot of explanation here because you've already been through, Deanston Distillery as well as the Clydeside, they both do the same thing. They produce an exquisite spirit. But the real difference is that, of course, Deanston's been in operation for a number of years. And Clydeside they opened less than 3 years ago. So what's that tell us? See, not only do we have unlimited access for video because they're such a new distillery, they have not sold a single bottle yet. And why is that? Well, because it has to be aged for 3 years and 1 day to legally call it a Scotch whiskey, and they need to wait. So that's how that works. Now, here's the interesting difference, and look at this picture. Okay, you notice those 3 stills. They claim that they're distilling 3 different times. We're triple distilled. Again, we're starting with 15,000 gallons, okay? Now, another distillery that we visited was Auchentoshan. And you may be familiar with the Auchentoshan brand of Scotch, or the Auchentoshan brand of whiskeys. And I mean, same rules apply, but now they use what they call triple distilled. In order to be triple distilled, it tends to give a distiller or a distillery a leg up or an edge on competitors. It kind of sets them apart from the crowd, you know. And to go through this again, it's 8% alcohol by volume and 15,000 gallons. That seemed to be kind of like the average in all of these distilleries. So they're dealing with really, really large volumes. Another underlying theme was distillers' active dry yeast. Another underlying theme was grains, water, malted grains, water, yeast, and then their process. So again, it validates everything that we've been doing. They're just doing it on a larger scale. Now here's how they go. You know, we've had this discussion before about triple distilled. And I've had the questions, George, is triple distilled better than single distilled? Well, let's understand what triple distilled really relates to. Now, number one, yes, triple distilled, I can see and envision why, and I can probably theorize in my own mind why it's probably a more cleaner, more clear, maybe more crisp and robust aroma flavor. But not really that much. I have a hard time thinking that it's so distinctive that it's different from single distilled. But what I will submit to is that when you think about it, it's all to do with controlling volume. Think about this. They put 15,000 gallons in here, 57,000 liters. That would be a nice thing to do, but it's really impractical. So what they do is they cut the batch in half. And so they put 7,000 gallons in here, and then they run that puppy, let's get that out of there, they run that puppy as fast as they possibly can. What's that remind you of? Yeah, it's a stripping run. The stripping run, and that brings out, the result is, it goes from 8% alcohol by volume to somewhere around 23%. Now that's collected in a separate location, you know, after it goes through the condenser, and then that is pumped from that location into the second still. And of course, you know you're not going to have 7,000 gallons. You're going to have considerably less. So that sits in here. And then what they do is they introduce, that just sits here and waits. Oh, by the way. Then they introduce the second batch that they cut in half, and they're going to run that, that's going to come out, and they're going to add that to this. So now you've got your volume from 15,000 is controlled. You've really brought it down dramatically. Now, as this sets here, it sets here and it's starting to warm. Now they're going to heat this up, they're going to run this one. Now they'll run this one the same way they ran this one. Okay, so it's a time function as well as it is a volume control. And in this particular case, once this one's run, their anticipation and their expectation is 31% alcohol by volume. Think about this now. We're not really concerned with flavor, either here or here, character or anything else, because that's carrying over on its own. We're really controlling volume. At the very end of this, what happens is that this is also, this double run in here is collected in a separate location and then pumped back into the final, what you can call the polishing still. Now, notice also the difference in shapes. These are primarily straight up with a small bulge. Both of them, they're considered stripping runs. Whereas you have this large, and a lot of times we call that an onion. So this bit large onion also causes a cyclonic effect inside that column, which enables them to have some bit of reflux that takes place, which of course increases their alcohol by volume dramatically without affecting the flavor and the taste, which are the two of the same thing. So, and their end result is 71% alcohol by volume. 71 actually to 73. But they're very, very precise about that. And so what's that equate to? Somewhere around 146 proof. Of which is sizably smaller than their original 15,000 gallons. You understand that now. So it is more of a volume control method as opposed to distilling it 3 times in order to get it right. They're purposely distilling it 3 times right at the very end in order to control the volume to make it efficient, and cost effective, and at the same time good. I hope I've cleared that up, and that should answer a lot of questions about a lot of spirits that are on the shelf today. As always, you know, you can get in touch with me. Happy distilling.